A new book purports to tell the true story of the violent life and violent death of one of the country's most notorious mobsters. Entertainment Tonight has the story for this third weekend of February 1992.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Hart. Lisa Gibbons is home this weekend with her brand new son, Troy, her husband, Steve, and, of course, Lexi.
Got both those babies out, finally.
Absolutely.
And I'm John Tesh. We begin this weekend edition of Entertainment Tonight with a special and exclusive inside look at the real life of a mobster, a subject often brought to the movie screen in fiction. We go inside the pages of Double Cross, the biography of underworld boss Sam Giancana, written by those who knew him well. Blood relatives, his brother Chuck Giancana and his namesake nephew Sam Giancana.
Would you tell us whether if you have opposition from anybody that you dispose of them by having them stuffed in a trunk? Is that what you do, Mr. Giancana?
Decline to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate.
In 1961, Attorney General Robert Kennedy made mobster Sam Mooney Giancana the #1 organized crime figure on his most wanted list. Giancana was one of the most ruthless, bloodthirsty mobsters of all time. He ruled Chicago and much of the country with an iron fist. His murderous actions equal anything ever shown in Hollywood movies. He claimed involvement in the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. The book Double Cross, written by his brother and confidant Chuck and his godson Sam, paints him as just as vicious in private life. His nephew Sam experienced his uncle's brutality firsthand at age 5 when he had this meeting with him.
He extended his hand, I naturally extended mine to shake his, and he proceeded to squeeze my hand, and I don't mean just firmly. He continued to squeeze it harder and harder, wouldn't stop, and my mother stood next to me, didn't say a word, and I tried as best I could not to whimper or to cry or anything because I knew he was testing me. He was always that kind of person.
Sam Mooney Giancana was born in 1908 and grew up in The Patch, the tough West Side Italian ghetto of Chicago. He gravitated towards gang life and crime. Mooney's younger brother Chuck grew up in the shadow of his mobster sibling. In the book, Chuck recalls a time when he was 6 years old and his 21-year-old brother killed a member of a rival gang right in front of his eyes. Chuck was playing in the street.
A man came up to him who he didn't recognize, and the man asked him, could he play? And he said, well, no, this is a one-person game. And out suddenly, before my father could say anything, he saw his brother step up to the man and shoot him in the head, and the man fell dead right in front of my father, and Mooney disappeared just as quickly.
Using guns and knives, Giancana killed his way up the ladder in the service of Al Capone and other mob bosses. J. Robert Nash is a crime historian.
My research has shown that he was very adept with the knife, and it was a silent weapon, and he was very adept at it, as opposed to the gun, which would draw attention.
Giancana was the #2 man after Tony Accardo in the 1950s. Then he decided he'd like to try life at the top.
He went to Accardo's home one night and knocked on the door and thought he heard footsteps coming on the other side of the door, and pulled out a .45 and emptied it through the door. Well, a woman could have been there, a child on the other side, but hey, that was his message. Then he left.
Accardo lived, but Giancana took over leadership, assuming total control in 1955. If you crossed him, you died. According to the book, William Action Jackson was a gangster suspected of being an FBI informant. He met a gruesome end, hung on a meat hook at Giancana's command.
He was taken to a warehouse and really was tortured and beaten for 2 days, and eventually died. But what they did was circulate photographs later on of him to everyone around the organization to make sure that people understood that this is the kind of end results that can happen if you don't fall in line or you decide to talk.
Former FBI agent Bill Romer was after Giancana for 18 years and has written books about his experience. He says he had many face-to-face confrontations with the man.
He started calling me all kinds of names in the American Airlines concourse at O'Hare in Chicago. And I just was not used to that kind of abuse. And so I finally called everybody around. I said, come around and see this piece of scum. This is Sam Giancana. He's the boss of the Chicago mob. You people are so lucky you can pass through Chicago. We have to live with this piece of slime. Just look at this jerk. He never had been talked to, just like I had never been talked to. He had never been, the successor to Al Capone, and he bumped up against me and he said, Romer, he said, you lit a fire tonight that's never going to go out. We'll get you if it's the last thing we ever do.
But the FBI proved tougher than Giancana. He was imprisoned in 1965 and was constantly hounded by agents when he got out. In 1975, he was going to testify in front of a Senate committee. Many thought he'd talk about his association with the CIA, how he'd been hired by them to kill Fidel Castro, and his involvement in the deaths of many world leaders. But on June 19th, someone who knew Mooney came to see him carrying a .22 with a silencer. Chicago reporter John Drummond of WBBM-TV says many believe it was a mob hit.
The mob felt that he would not be willing to spend, at his age and his health condition, to do any more time in jail on contempt of court charges. That he would talk and spill mob secrets rather than go to jail again. That's one theory.
Giancana died as he'd lived, violently. Now the brother he confided in and his godson hope to show the extent of his destructive power. From his early days as a Chicago hitman to his worldwide domination of the mob in the 1960s, Sam Giancana was a force to be reckoned with. And Monday and Tuesday on Entertainment Tonight, Sam Giancana's claims that the mob murdered Marilyn Monroe and was involved in JFK's assassination.